Welcome to Time of Death. This video is for informational purposes only and in no way meant to glorify or condone violence. In today's video, we'll be discussing the murder of Army Isom and Shirley Isom. Both were found dead Friday, December 26, 2014 in the 300 block of Rough Rider Road in Laverne, according to LA County Coroner records. Luke Matthew Favela was subsequently arrested and charged with the murder. The following is the evidence at trial. Army and Shirley Isom resided in a large two-story house on Rough Rider Road in Laverne, California. The secluded hilltop property included 58 acres of undeveloped land and several other structures. There was a gated entrance to the property at the end of a cul-de-sac, which could be reached from the base of the hill by traveling up Live Oak Canyon Road, a narrow winding road with no sidewalk. On December 26, 2014, around 1 p.m., Eutimio de la Rosa, the Isom's longtime gardener, discovered the bodies of Army and Shirley at their home. De la Rosa had been welding in a workshop on the property when he heard the sound of a water pump breaking down. He drove up to the house in a golf cart to check on the pump. On the way, De la Rosa saw Shirley's body lying on the ground in the carport area outside the home's upper level entrance, and then saw Army's body on the floor inside the entrance. De la Rosa believed Shirley was dead and Army was seriously injured. Shirley died from multiple blunt force and sharp force injuries. She suffered a fractured skull as a result of blunt force trauma to her head. She had a large sharp force wound on her left shoulder, another sharp force injury above her eye, and a laceration on her arm, leg, and ear. She had an abrasion on her back of her shoulder, consistent with having been dragged, and a degloving injury on her hand, consistent with her hand being pulled out from a closed door or trunk. Shirley also sustained several defensive wounds, including incised wounds on both hands and a fractured finger and wrist. She had one deep post-mortem cut on her neck. All other injuries were inflicted prior to her death. Army died from multiple blunt force injuries to his head. He suffered extensive skull fractures and displacement, which caused bleeding in his brain. He had a large laceration on the left side of his forehead and another laceration above his left ear. He had bruises on his lower lip, around his eye, and on his cheek. Army also had several lacerations and bruises on one arm and both hands consistent with defensive wounds. Based on the evidence, a crime scene reconstruction expert testified that the perpetrator likely attacked Army in the foyer and Shirley in the adjacent office. The blood pattern evidence showed Shirley likely was dragged or pulled through the foyer and into the driveway. The perpetrator then attempted to place Shirley inside the trunk of the Lexus, but failed to do so. The blood found underneath the Lexus and on the tires indicated the vehicle was moved a short distance after Shirley was attacked. Shirley's cell phone was the only item missing following the murders. According to her cell phone records, Shirley had two calls with her daughter between 11:22 a.m. and 12:42 p.m. Her cell phone was in the vicinity of the Isom's home during that time. At 1:17 p.m., the cell phone was still near the Isom's home but moving slightly east. Later that day, the cell phone was in the Pomona area for a few hours and was then turned off. Although Favela had no known connection to the Isoms, his DNA was in several locations at the scene of the murders. Favela was a single source contributor of DNA found underneath Shirley's fingernail fragments in the foyer. He was a major contributor of DNA found on top of that fingernail fragment. In addition, Favela was a minor contributor of DNA taken from Shirley's hip. He was also a minor contributor of DNA found on the interior trunk lid of the Lexus. On March 10, 2015, the LA County Sheriff Department transported Favela, who was already in custody on an unrelated offense, from San Bernardino to LA for a live lineup. Two undercover officers posing as inmates rode in a van with Favela for the trip to LA. During the trip, Favela made loud comments about his mental health, including that he was bipolar and schizophrenic, and heard voices. He asked the undercover officer if a person with this psychiatric condition could receive a life sentence or the death penalty. He also said that if he was going to spend the rest of his life behind bars, it's going to be in a mental institution all the way. When the officer asked about his crime, Favela replied that he had stabbed two people and made a stabbing motion with his hand. Favela told the undercover officer that the police didn't have much evidence because his mother had inadvertently thrown away the knife and bloody clothing that were in the trunk of her car. Favela also said he resided in Pomona and would run the streets of Pomona doing stupid stuff. Following the trial, the jury found Favela guilty of the first-degree murders of Army and Shirley Isom, the first-degree burglary of the Isom's residence, and an unrelated first-degree burglary. Favela was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of life without the possibility of parole for the murders of the Isams, a consecutive 13-year term for the burglaries, and an additional 5-year term based on the prior serious felony conviction. Shirley Isom was 74 years old at the time of death. Army Isom was 89 years old at the time of death.